It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 153, recorded on this day, the 16th of April, 2026. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. How are things today, mate?
Good.
Yeah, how are things in Hong Kong? Any major dramas around the Iran war impacting on the island there?
Not really. I mean, prices are up and have been up for a bit, and that's due to transport costs. But nothing.
When you say prices, it's not just petrol. I know you're not a
driver,
pedestrian, but food as well.
Prices for food and other goods, and that's because a lot of our food comes in from somewhere. Almost all of it comes from somewhere else. So.
Yeah, and a lot of it presumably is coming through from the Middle East. I did see a map of Australia's diesel supplies with ships on the way from the Americas, really, North America, the United States and Canada, and some from South America as well. So some little bit of bypassing going on there.
I could tell you, we had a couple of lamb chops a couple of nights ago. Came from New Zealand, and they were absolutely delicious. But I think they had their own seat on the plane to get here.
Yeah. Well, lamb used to be the staple, didn't it? The inexpensive meat in Australia, and now it's the most expensive, particularly spring lamb. You'll be getting. Well, that'll be the end of the spring lamb season in New Zealand some time ago. But yes, it is one of the more expensive cuts to get, and has been for a long time. Breaking news, Jack, today the South Australian Electoral Commission has announced that the seat of Narunga, which had been declared for One Nation's Chantel Thomas, with a margin of 58 votes, will now go into a recount because a number of ballots, including 77 unopened absent ordinary ballot papers and 4 declaration papers that were returned in the neighbouring district of Stewart, a bit of an administrative stuff up there, must now be counted. The commission has said that the acting commissioner, in fact, has said, let me be clear, the result has already been declared. The purpose of the count is for the commission to determine whether the result would have differed had those ballots been included in the initial count and the subsequent recount. Because it was so close, of course, there was a recount. If the count reveals the result of the election could change, the commission would seek legal advice from the Court of Disputed Returns, otherwise known as the High Court. We're not at that point yet, Jack. Not a great look, though, is it? When we have sort of disappearing ballots, and in this day and age of where people shriek electoral fraud, I can only imagine how some of the One Nation people might be dealing with this news, Jack.
Yes, look, it's everybody who's been around an election will tell you that mistakes are possible. I think it was back in the 80s we had a. Do you remember the state election in Victoria where one of the seats was decided by taking a name out of a hat?
Oh no, you got me there. You're stretching my memory there, Jack.
I can't remember what the seat was. In any event, I think the Liberals won it, and we were the lawyers for the Labor Party at the time, so we went to the Court of Disputed Returns, which in Victoria would be the Supreme Court. And I think it ran for 3 or 4 weeks, and in the end, they ran a re-election. But
of course, there was the several thousand missing ballots in the Western Australian Senate election, I think in 2016, and they had to have another vote. There were some odd winners announced there early on until there was discovered, I think from memory, about 4,000 ballots had just appeared out of nowhere, but sitting in the back of someone's house, I suppose, in a shoebox or so, a couple of shoeboxes. You need more than one for 4,000 votes. But quite sensibly, they called for a re-election of the Senate. Very expensive it was, but these things are important to get right.
Well, that was a lesson for me after a couple of weeks of sitting in court listening to all this evidence. And once they started to pull the thing apart, they discovered that other errors had been made, right? Or, that went sort of both ways, right? So if you get to that point, you are almost always going to find some errors without there being any skullduggery. And there's always a chance of a little bit of skullduggery. So,
well, have you ever acted as a scrutineer? Perhaps we should explain how a count works, Jack. It is one of those sort of mysteries, and we take it on trust that this independent electoral commission that we have, federally and in all states and territories, that there is a count going on with AEC employees or indeed volunteers. And there will be scrutineers from each party sort of watching what's going on.
Yes, people used to say to me, how come when they cross to the tally room cameras, Richo knows what's happening with a seat before the Australian Electoral Commission seems to? I said, well, that's really easy. He's got the benefit of the scrutineers. So what you do is if you're a booth captain, I've been a booth captain, is you have a person on each table and they check that the votes are counted properly. But as those votes are counted, they keep a kind of rough running tally of where the preferences are going.
You could probably do it in your head.
Yes.
And then you ring Richo and say, we're either in deep trouble or we're going okay.
Yeah, so once the first pass of counting's done, someone leaves the polling booth, and you can't get back in once you leave. They leave the polling booth and go and telephone the party headquarters and say, look, the preferences are running 65, 40, 45.
Yeah. So, look, mistakes happen. We do have a paper and pencil or pen. You can use either. System in this country. It is the best system. Voting machines, it's not so much that they can be manipulated, but it's more that I just think there's greater confidence in the system where you actually have a paper ballot and it completed by voters or indeed left blank by voters. But mistakes do happen. You're counting up. I was just looking at One Nation and some of their funding arrangements. They got 3.6% of the vote in 2022, and they get these days. It's about to change. So they get $3.38 a vote. It's about to go up to $5, Jack, per vote once you get over that 4% threshold for political parties. 3% doesn't sound right because it would have been over, and it was 6%. I'm sorry. So though that party will receive the number of votes, and 6% of the electorate is 1 million votes. Or around that sort of number. Yes, it's easy to make mistakes, and we want to avoid any sort of conspiracy theories because there's a lot of this kind of chatter going on around the world, Jack. But the pencil and paper is the best way to go, we think. I know you believe that, Jack.
Yeah, in terms of corruption, it's like all corruption in Australia, really. There's almost zero chance of rigging a federal election, a little bit more chance of rigging a state election. Where there is an opportunity is in a local government election.
Yeah, because you've got such a small number of votes.
Yes,
That's the
yes.
first thing.
Yeah.
Yes, look, there are possibilities of corruption, but generally speaking, we haven't had those issues going through. We do have the three gold standards of democracy in this country. That is, as I said before, an independent electoral commissioner, independent of government. We have compulsory voting, and we've had that since the 20s and since 1920s, and now compulsory preferential voting. It makes sure that every vote is counted, but also particularly Americans get quite upset when you tell them that we have compulsory voting in Australia, as if it's some sort of expression of or challenge to rights of movement and things like that. But you only have to go to the poll. You only have to go to the polling booth, and get your name ticked off. You don't have to vote. And that's the basis of it. And that's the reason why we still have I think it's a $20 fine, hasn't got any more than that over the journey. So, if you don't want to vote, you just got to go and get your name ticked off. And it's part of that sort of civil responsibility, like filing a tax return and all those sorts of things that people have to do on a yearly basis. Little bit of a blue, but it'll get sorted out. I must say, by the way, that Chantel Thomas, the declared One Nation character, made a bit of news during the week. I don't know if you saw this, Jack, on 5AA radio with Pembo, and Pembo's political correspondent came on and suggested that Chantel Thomas was a bit startled that she had to attend the parliament. She thought she could, it was reported that she thought she could Zoom her way in there and continue her business as a beautician, she runs, according to Pembo, runs a hair salon. But that was kind of dismissed quite quickly. Chantel Thomas said, "I've never owned a beauty salon. I've been the mother of my children for a while." She is a makeup artist, and she was fully aware of all her responsibilities. But anyway, she would have got a call this morning from the South Australian Electoral Commission and told just put all those plans on hold. So anyway, further stuff electorally, the Farrah By-Election on the 9th of May, just a few weeks away now. Now, there was a private poll, UComs, I believe, and it was certainly published by our mate on Channel 6, young aspiring media proprietor in the making, who runs a very successful Twitter account, giving us all the news and sometimes a bit of insight. So he released this UComs polling, which was published privately, and we don't know who commissioned that. There have been the UComs poll. Often the Australia Institute will commission polls, and they did do one on the Farrah By-Election, but that goes back to the middle of last month. But this one has One Nation at 40.3, which is a 33% swing because they only got about 66% last time. The independent Millthorpe, who the bookies have installed as favourite, I haven't looked at the betting markets for a little while, and seems to be endorsed widely across the board. She's on 21, Lib's 14. Let's just say since Susan Lee has gone, is down from about 43%. Labor down 10 to 5%. The Nats, who didn't run in Farrah and haven't run for some time, 4.8%, Greens 3.8%, others 1.4%. On those figures, Jack, One Nation wins. Pretty certain.
I'm not quite so sure. I still think
you get to 40, it's really hard to knock off.
To knock off, yes, but all those preferences from the Liberals on down will be distributed.
What we don't know yet, Jack, is just who. Well, we've discussed this, but how the HTVs will run and who's preferencing who. Will the Libs will the Libs preference Millthorpe or will they preference One Nation? We don't know yet.
I think they'll probably preference the independent, and I think the preferences will run to the independent.
Labor should be doing the same, but probably will preference the Greens and then Millthorpe. That's just my guess. Where the Nats go is another bit of a mystery. Just with their 4.8%, are they going to preference One Nation or are they going to preference Millthorpe? So if we get to, and this is just the HTV, so people can vote whatever way they want. But if we do have Millthorpe with 21, 22, One Nation with 40, but Millthorpe receives pretty much all the preferences, yes, she would have a chance. Yeah. So we will wait and see. Much anticipation about the Farrah by-election. People of Farrah out Naranda away, mate, must be wondering what all the fuss is about.
Yes, I mean, there'll be a lot of people who vote One Nation this time who would preference somebody else, but those preferences won't be distributed because the lower parties will be distributed first. Right?
Yes.
And I would expect you would have a winner after that, one way or the other.
Yeah. It's going to be very interesting. If that 40% holds, it's going to be very hard to see any other outcome than a One Nation win. And it'd have to be very, very disciplined preference allocations for the independent to come up trumps. She certainly, for mine, looks to be the best candidate. I did see the One Nation guy who looks okay. You know, you get some crazies with the One Nation candidates, but this guy looked at least reasonably sensible. And Millthorpe probably is the best candidate of that lot. Should Labor have run, Jack?
Probably not.
Yeah, they're just going to cop a battering. 10% swing against and all that sort of stuff. So yes, it would have been better to sit that one out, I would have thought.
I've handed out how to vote cards in rural seats for the Labor Party when you're likely to get 5%. You know, it's not always the most fun day.
A fair bit of abuse every now and then too, Jack.
Yeah.
Yes, all right. The other big story in Australia at the moment is the refinery blaze in Geelong, one of our two refineries left in the nation, and supplies half of Victoria's fuel and 10% of the nation's fuel, including diesel and jet fuel. The fire has actually been extinguished now. It looked like a hell of a blaze when it was going. But it's been blamed on equipment failure. Production will be disrupted for months. Couldn't have come at a worse time, Jack.
No. I hope the boys at Geelong Grammar are okay.
I really don't care, except they have a beautiful cricket ground, Jack.
It's right next door to the refinery. Is it happens. Yes, yeah.
I can't place the refinery in Geelong.
No, it's in Corio. It's that's why I say it's out there, and it is a beautiful ground. I played football there once, and I'd never seen a surface like it in those days.
Beautiful wicket. You just looked at it and went, win the toss, please, skipper, and bat.
Yes.
Yes. But more on politics, Jack. The Liberals have announced an immigration, their immigration policy. Pretty sketchy on the details, Jack, particularly around Australian values and one or two other things, like anyone coming into the country can have their phone examined by Border Force people looking for presumably bad caricatures and mockery of Angus Taylor himself. But we don't know exactly what would create a you're in or you're out situation on an examination of the phone. As we've discussed many times, the coalition is fighting a war on two fronts: traditional foes, Labor to the left, and One Nation, a surging One Nation to the right. And they are sort of in betwixt and between. Have they just decided the hell with it? We'll will try and knock some of the steam out of One Nation?
A little bit of that. I mean, there are some sort of sensible things in this, and there are some things that it would indicate that they just don't quite get how it all works.
Yeah.
The oddest one is the desire to try and predict whether people will make a good contribution to the country depending on where they're from. It seems to be based on an expectation that if people come from similar countries, they will have a commitment to to democracy, the rule of law, all that kind of stuff.
And there are no guarantees about that.
No, and in fact, I can tell you from personal observation that quite often the reverse is true. For 10 years I listened to refugees or people who wanted to be refugees explain why they wanted to live in Australia. And quite often it's the people from the worst countries who could say to you, this is why I want to be here, right? But, I've had, people from Bangladesh or India make a better explanation of what the rule of law is and why it's important than most lawyers I know could, right? They actually understand because they've lived without it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they understand what it's about. Right? So quite often they make the best contribution to democracy and the values that we espouse.
Here's what Kosmaris has to say. There's an extended piece on his Twitter account today. And he talks about something he said nobody is saying about Angus Taylor's announcement. We asked 2,000 voters who they blame for rising prices and interest rates, and 40% said politicians, 20% said CEOs, 6% said immigrants. And even among One Nation voters, he writes, the people Taylor is performing for, 59% blame politicians. He goes on to talk about demographics. The demographic backdrop makes it worse. India is about to overtake England as Australia's largest overseas-born diaspora, likely confirmed in ABS data due this month. The median age of England-born Australians is 59.6, India-born 35.8. One of those communities is the electoral future of metropolitan Australia. The other is not. And he says, chasing ghosts of the past whilst losing votes. And he's got an extended piece on his Substack there, Jack. Yeah, I mean, there have been other commenters, of course, yes.
There is a problem in a sense that people have lost faith in our immigration policy. And up until the last, 5 or 10 years, the faith Australia's internal support for its immigration policy has been just about the highest in the world, right? And it's diminished quite a lot, and that's because this is not a partisan political thing. That neither of the recent parties who've held government have taken the people into their confidence and said, "This is what we're doing and why."
There's just a figure established, and that's it. And that figure in 21-22, Jack, was, if I got that right, 23, 24, 25, 22, 23, I should say, was just over 500,000 people. But we've seen both sides of this coin, Jack, because we had no immigration, essentially none at all, during the pandemic. And we saw real economic consequences to that, particularly in agriculture. And then in order to compensate, we went through what was probably too large an intake for that period. And now things are getting back to the sort of normality of around 250 per year, 250,000 per year, that is. And that's a mix of a range of a range of visas being given from residency status. I mean, tell me the various tell me the various visa statuses that are made available to people who want to come to this country, Jack. Obviously, we have people holidaying, and people want to come and work here, even for a fixed period of time. But then there's also, special skills immigration levels. There's also family reunion levels, Jack. Just go through the whole bit.
There are students, etc. Yeah,
yes,
Australia does have one specific problem, but the coalition policy doesn't really address it, and that is that they've got, I think it's nearly 100,000 people now who are waiting for determinations to see whether they're refugees, whether they'll get a protection visa, and that's because the government's lost control of the system. And once you get that, it's a spiral situation. Once the delay to get a determination goes over, 3 years or so, there's an incentive for a lot of people to make the application because they know they're going to get 3 or 4 years in the country, generally on a bridging visa, and they get to stay, right? While that's being determined. And the more people who do that, the longer the delay gets, and it starts to spiral out of control. And it has spiraled out of control.
It has
and
been.
There are things.
And I noticed that some of our UK and Irish visitors are using essentially protection visas to extend their stay. But when they just turned up, it's just easier than going through a pathway to residency.
Yes, it is.
Normal residency. Yes. So, they'll be backpacking around. Gee, I like it around here. So I'm going to claim I can't be returned to Ireland because I'll be persecuted there, Jack.
Yeah, and I'll get 4 years out of that, right?
Wouldn't it be an easy way to say these countries are good and therefore and there's no political persecution there?
Well, the UK.
So if you're from that country, no, get the hell out.
Yeah, the UK has done something like that, and it hasn't really worked,
right?
To be honest, this seems counterintuitive, but the quickest thing you can do about this is to deal with the most recent applicants first.
Yes, we've talked about this, and you say the best way of getting rid of the backlog is not to deal with these long-running sore applicants, but with the new ones first, and be pretty harsh on the applicants, particularly if you're an English backpacker and claiming that Sir Keir Starmer might lock you up if you return through Heathrow. Seems a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah. So in your example, the English or Irish backpacker. If you know your primary applications are going to be dealt with in about 3 weeks, and you will have exhausted your right of appeal in 6 months, you're not going to make the application because it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you $2,000 at least, or something at a time, right? So you're not going to make the application. So that means you stop this counterintuitive idea. Means you stop a lot of the new applications dead. They don't turn up, and then
wouldn't that just lead to a lot of overstays, Jack? And then you'd have to, deal with them, ship them off to Villawood, and then deport them slowly but surely.
Yeah, well, there's always a lot of overstayers in Australia.
Well, this is such a good place, Jack.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to be here?
A colleague of mine used to say, "Let's face it, Jack. We're just one step in the voluntary repatriation program. Even if we say no, they don't go anywhere."
Yes. How many would there be? 100,000, 200,000? How many overstays would there be in the country at any given time?
There could be. There's an old story. I don't know whether it's true because I couldn't check it, but in a suburban shopping strip in Melbourne, the compliance fellows pulled up with their vans, a couple of vans, walked into a Thai restaurant and collared the entire staff from dishwasher to front of house, everyone. And there were people sitting there saying, but I haven't finished my meal.
Look, there was the local dodgy tobacconist, Jack, was recently closed down, and the poor fellow running that, obviously receiving a bit of cash in hand, had no work visa. So not only did the store that he ran was closed down, he was shipped off to Villawood and faces a difficult future in the country. He would be deported at some point.
Yeah,
it's just very difficult to get these things right, isn't it?
It is, and it's a constant battle to get these things right. The gossip used to always be that compliance got most of their tips from business competitors of those who are here overstaying, so that yeah. Oh, well, you see this now in the United States on a fairly regular basis on social media. Be someone born in the country who's bears a Latino face, and you'll have some screeching Texan or Californian saying, "I'll call ice on you. I'll call ice on you." Jack, here's the big one. We should devote a show to this, and we might even do that next week. What are Australian values? No one seems to know, but the Liberal Party has pinned their policy on something that is incredibly nebulous and uncertain. And I would say that the Australian value that stands out for me is one of fairness. And one of equality, that regardless of your gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, etc., you will have a fair crack in this country. Australians share a commitment to the building blocks of human rights, and these are run around the world. The rule of law, some kind of representative government, a more or less free press, private property rights. They're the things that underpin human rights wherever in the world you go. And when you don't have them, or you don't have most of them, you don't have good protection of human rights. And I think Australians do understand that. But we're not a very jingoistic country. We don't shout out.
Far lap of the Don, Jack. Come on.
Yeah. Well, yes, and that's always done with a little bit of irony, really. I
did see a recent political publication, Jack, that points the finger of blame on all our ills, particularly around public administration at John Howard. I don't know if you've read this book or read of it, but in that book it was claimed that part of the questionnaire for incoming residents of Australia was that they had to know the Don's batting average, which we all know is 99.94.
Well, all the ABC readers do, because it's their
post office box in every capital city. Look, I'm sort of going to write a piece about this, but we could talk about this all day. And I did write a piece many years ago, and my first Australian value was win the toss and bat, and that was just after Ricky Ponting had put the Poms in a disastrous move.
Poor decision. Yes.
You always win the toss and bat, Jack. That is an Australian value. It probably should be a cricket-wide value.
Isn't it true that you're allowed to think about it, but then you still
you are allowed to think about it, then you're back. Yeah, then you call it back. All right. Yes. Look, I think we might just do this next week, Jack. I think we'll have a bit of a chat about Australian values, about community, about tribalism, and all that sort of stuff. What it's like to be an Australian, and in obviously through the prism of our lived experience in the country.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on now, Jack. Net zero and the new world. Now, Chris Uhlmann has been a profound critic of net zero. He writes, coal-fired plants that were meant to close are being kept open. Others are being run harder. Japan is increasing coal-fired generation to conserve gas. South Korea has lifted caps on coal output. India has ordered its coal fleet to run flat out. The Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Thailand are doing the same. is he referring to here a response to perhaps firstly the Iran war and then secondly the Ukrainian conflict, which commenced 4 years ago? Is that what he's talking about? Is it a response to various significant geopolitical events, or is he talking about just trends?
There's two things happening at once here, or a number of things happening at once. Yes, there is a response to, the Ukrainian-Russian war and its effect on energy supplies, and of course the more current events in Iran. But what's underpinning that is that there is just a growth in demand for energy, so that the use of all sources of energy is increasing, right? Nothing's replacing anything else in a current sense. All of the fossil fuels use are going up, and renewables are adding to that.
Well, that's not quite true. But I'll just, before we start, we'll just read into this is Dr. Nick Waith from the Energy Institute Statistical Review of 2025. He said, for the first time since 2006, all major energy sources, renewables and fossil fuels alike, hit record consumption levels, a reflection of surging global demand. So part of the reason for that, Jack, is we've got people coming out of poverty around the world, and basically in fits and starts, I suppose, and in these areas, I suppose the great surges, burgeoning middle classes in India and China in particular, are creating a need for more energy, more electricity generation.
The richer people get, the more energy they consume.
Yeah, but I just wanted to, just pick you up. According to, I've taken the stats away, but coal, as part of an overall contribution to energy, has declined in the since 2022. It was at 34%. And now it's at 31% of that energy mix. So it is reducing, you'd have to say, overall.
Its percentage is reducing, but the actual amount of coal...
But I take your point there. But isn't net zero still, even if it is an ambition, isn't it still necessary? Because we need, if we don't have goals, we will lose our way on this stuff. Even if they're ambitious.
Chris Ullman's view is that people are going to have a light bulb moment and realise that this is an ambition that's just not practical, not in the foreseeable future. Personally, my view is the fondness for net zero. Boris Johnson, of all people, he really kicked this along, right? The net zero idea. I don't think this fondness for net zero can be turned around at all quickly, whatever Chris Ullman may think.
Well, if you don't have net zero, what do you have? I mean, if you don't have even an ambitious target to attempt to achieve, then what you are going to have is far more carbon in the atmosphere and triggering, and I know you're a skeptic on this, but triggering further consequences of climate change, and those things can't be just easily dismissed. We are seeing wilder weather. There's no doubt about that. We are on the cusp, as we're told by climate scientists, of a terrible future, and where so much of, let's say, Australian land cannot be farmed. A lot of Australian properties will be overwhelmed just by rising seas and things like that, Jack. I mean, certainly we have to have a target, even if it's, like I say, very ambitious, because if we don't have one, you know that we're going to fall into old habits where, let's say, a relatively readily available resource like coal is dragged out of the ground, and then you've got 20 or 30 years of coal-fired electricity generation.
Yeah. What I think is going to happen, and it's already starting to happen, I think it was the Berlin, it's the German energy minister. She says the UN should loosen its rigid adherence to the net zero goal. And I think that's going to happen. I think because, the Germans have looked at it and have realised they made an awful error in closing down their nuclear power stations. And they now think they're too expensive to reopen. But
it has to be said, though, Jack.
They've got an energy problem.
It has to be said, though, that it was done in the shadows of the Fukushima nuclear leak after a tsunami hit a power plant.
Yeah, and the argument for it might have been pretty good. The Germans now look at it and say it was an awful error. Yeah,
and look, if you've got nuclear energy in place, it is relatively safe. And these plants can be upgraded. They do, unlike the coal-fired electricity generation, they can run with maintenance and with expansion, and nuclear power plants can run technically forever. The difficulties, I would say, in introducing nuclear energy to a country like Australia is, there are just too many issues related to geography that make it far too expensive to do. But for those countries with an existing thing, because the French have, I think it's now 50% of all electricity generation comes from their nuclear power in France. It used to be, I think, it was constitutionally entrenched 70%, or certainly legislatively entrenched that it had to be 70%. It's reduced now with the additional input of renewables. I just think if we discard the thing, as the National Party has done, and One Nation plans to do, I just think if we have no targets, no goals, then it just won't work out, and we might be, in fact, sort of signing our own fate to a very large degree in terms of the degree of arable land we have around the world, how we're able to feed everyone, and how we're able to keep the lights on without disrupting our lives too much. So again, just a complex problem that has no clear way out, except to say, Jack, that if we don't do these things, we might be consigning future generations to a terrible future.
Well, I'd be investing in oil and gas companies myself. I think it's good that they've got a future.
Well, I think we've seen the reliance starkly placed in front of us, our reliance on fossil fuels, particularly petrol and gas to a large degree, since the Iran war has commenced on February 28. How's that mess going at the moment, Jack? J.D. Vance, the great closer, didn't close anything, of course, and scuttled away from Islamabad. Are we any closer to some form of resolution, Jack?
Well, I think he's heading back to Islamabad now.
Yeah, he is, yeah.
In fact, I think the Pakistanis are in Iran as we speak. I'm a bit 50-50 on how close they are to a deal. Certainly, the boffin investors in the US are very sure there'll be a deal.
Markets went ballistic overnight, didn't they?
The S&P 500 is back to pre-Iran war levels, in fact, record levels. And that's on the basis that they think the war is just about wrapped up satisfactorily. Now,
there certainly is that perception, Jack, in the marketplace as the S&P went through a spectacular rise overnight, and that would indicate that that things are going to go ahead. But the Strait of Hormuz,
if they're right, I mean,
it's sentiment, really. It's sentiment and a vibe, really.
Well, and they employ pay tidy sums for geostrategic experts that they think are experts to tell them what they think is going to happen, right? But that's not to say that they're going to be right. But certainly there is a large body of opinion that says yes, this thing's about to be wrapped up okay. Whether that's right or not, I don't know. But
no, of course. We have seen these spikes too in recent times. Big spikes, big collapses, or falls, not collapses, but falls, based on where it was perceived we were in terms of this Iranian conflict. Trump will say, well, we're almost done here, and then we're moving out. And the oil price drops, the markets go up, and then it turns out that there is a quagmire, and the oil price shoots up and the markets go down. So we are looking at sort of a fair amount of volatility at the moment.
Yeah.
All right. We shall keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, of course, we've got the US-led blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, Jack, and shipping is getting through, but not very much. I did see a Chinese tanker got through, and everyone sort of waved that one through, Jack.
Yes, yeah. It isn't terribly clear, nor would I expect it to be exactly what's happening, on the water there, right? Reporting from these situations is always tricky. There will be a view if you were sitting on an American ship in the Gulf there, and it might look a little bit different if you're on an Iranian ship, and it's always impossible to tell exactly what's happening.
All righty. I've just heard from my editor. Sorry about that, folks. It's a personal matter, but it's all good. So where were we? Sorry, I should go. I should go on.
We were talking about Elbow going to Brunei after having been to Singapore.
Well, yes, of course. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well fated around the world. Some nonsense. Really, we get hung up on the wrong things here. That it was some sort of social media campaign that Elbow didn't want to be photographed in front of the Australian flag and all this sort of nonsense, Jack. But overall, it seems that we have pretty good relations with our visitors to our immediate north.
I missed all of this. There you go. But
it was a social media kerfuffle. It wasn't reported in mainstream media. It was mainly a nonsense because he embraced he said, "Your Majesty," and sort of walked in. It was like me at the primates, and embraced the Sultan of Brunei. And that was said to be, he doesn't want to be photographed in front of the Australian flag. You think, no, that really wasn't getting what was going on. But of course, that sort of stuff has currency on social media. But it seems like
the only comment I saw on social media was people were bagging him for the terrible socks he was wearing, and the not very good suit and an unironed shirt. That I must be on the shallow end of.
He didn't have his band T-shirt on. That's an improvement.
Yeah.
But no, it seems like relations with countries like Singapore, very very important alliance that we have there, or very very important friendship that we have between the two nations there. Not just around oil, but it is of course the economic powerhouse of Southeast Asia. In Thailand, Malaysia, even Brunei, which is an oil-rich country, of course, Jack, and assurances made all round that we should sort of be near enough to the front of the queue, Jack. And as I said, large shipments of diesel are headed this way. So many governments around the world. I actually had a look at this, Jack. So many governments around the world have cut fuel excises, and some have just let it go. But other countries, of course, have different methods of pricing petrol to the consumer in their countries. Australia's drop in excise is the biggest, and it's temporary. They're looking at extending it, but I think it extends only to 1 June or possibly 30 June, 1 June, I think. And it may well be extended. But we made the biggest cut to our excises. The government made the biggest cut to fuel excise comparative to anywhere in the world. And so far, you'd have to say, Jack, that it's been managed reasonably well. The behaviour of Chris Bowen, perhaps notwithstanding, who says some rather odd things at times. Did you see his comment about take your roof racks off your cars? Did you see that? Please stop doing that. Chris, you're an intelligent bloke. I know a lot of people would disagree with me about that, but that is just a sort of nonsense thing. And people need to be communicated to, need to be informed better than that sort of grab bag of nonsense that you've been coming up with. He and
Ed Miliband, I reckon, are twins.
Chris Bowen, I made in my early days of writing for The Australian, I made the mistake of thinking that Chris Bowen was a relative of the great Lionel Bowen. I just imagined he was a nephew. Lionel Bowen was just a magnificent public servant. Chris, he's bright. He is bright. I've met him. I've heard him speak. But there's something of the zealot about him. That doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of people.
This is my Ed Miliband point. They hold the same ministries effectively. They're the net zero ministers of their respective countries. Ed Miliband in the UK, Chris Bowen in Australia. Between them, they are doing untold. If someone's going to please Chris Ullman and unravel net zero, it'll be those two, because they are so clumsy. And they make so many silly mistakes like that, so many silly statements like take your roof racks off your car, pump your tyres up, all that kind of stuff,
and
those people don't like being talked down to like that.
Well, those are the sorts of things you can put on a government website, right?
Yes.
Suggestions, hints, that sort of thing. For Chris Bowen to be talking like that, and he's really got, let's say, in terms of national mainstream media coverage, he's got about 10 seconds to make a point on any given day, and that's not the point to be made. Take the roof racks off your car, pump your tyres up. That's not where we want to be. What we want to be told is, look, where are supplies now? What's coming? What's going to be happening with excises beyond June, fuel excises and things like that? I mean, are we staring into the abyss? Because people do panic and do panic and do worry and will change their plans, and that affects everything through the economy ultimately, because we're not sure. We're thinking that by August, September, we might be completely housebound with no cars to use at all. And so you've got to reassure the public, and you've got to reassure them not with rhetoric and silly comments, but with some actual information. Here's what we've got. Here's what's coming. If it's not going to be all right, then it's not going to be all right. The one thing the government didn't want to do was petrol ration. And see, we have to talk about this on one show too. See, I actually don't think the world and Australians specifically have quite got over the pandemic. Now, there were a lot of very, very difficult decisions made, abundance of caution, all that sort of stuff. But there was government overreach, and in hindsight, probably more than there should have been. Now, we know people were acting, they were acting with that abundance of caution. But what it meant to a lot of people is that they lost income, they lost jobs, and they lost perhaps a sense of freedom of movement around the place. And I don't think those issues have been resolved, and it's contributed significantly to a failure of or a lack of confidence in government generally, Jack. So the idea that Albo would bring in petrol rationing, oh, gee whiz, you could just see Labor Party's vote dwindle into single figures, I think, just on that announcement. So really important to communicate to people, really important to say, hey, it's okay, we've got this in hand, don't lie to people. You've got to give them the information, but Chris Bowen is not one of those people. I must say rather rudely, Jack, that I believe, and I've written this, but it was quickly scrubbed by an editor, that Chris Bowen is leading the way in terms of rat-faced politicians, because he does look a bit rodent-like, doesn't he? There've been a few rodent-like faces in our politics, and Chris is just another one of those. But we shouldn't concentrate on people's looks. You and I are very handsome men, of course, so we can afford to look down on people a bit like that. But we shouldn't. And
I don't believe he is related to Lionel, who was a wonderful man.
No, he's definitely not related to Lionel Bowen, who was a god of public administration, one of the gun politicians we've had in this country, and just an overall fantastic human being.
Just a lovely, lovely man.
Yeah, the great Lionel Bowen. Have you ever faked your way into a job, Jack? Surely you have.
No, I don't think I have. Which is not to say I wouldn't, but it depends what you mean by faking. There's just a bit about some poor chap was caught in working for an NGO in the UK, and it turns out his qualifications were not quite what they seemed. And the bit that amused me about this was how often people will admit that they either lie or embellish there have been studies like this for a while, lie or embellish their record on LinkedIn, right? And as an old lawyer, it's a fine line sometimes between putting the best possible gloss on something and telling an outright lie,
Yeah, look, I suppose that's the distinction, isn't it? You can polish the turd a little bit, but you can't make the turd go away. No. Look, I haven't applied for a job for more than 20 years, so I don't know what I'll have to dust off the resume and brush the cobwebs off it. But look, LinkedIn, Jack, I'm not even sure why it exists and what it exists for. If you look at my LinkedIn account, I do have one because I use it to chase people up. You'll find that I worked for a publisher in 1985, and that's where it ends. Yeah. And I decided it was damned impertinent to ask any further questions of what I'm doing with my life. But back in the days when I used to employ people, you would always expect a little bit of luster on the resume, and if there wasn't one, you'd sort of wonder why.
Yes, yeah. I have had come across a couple of, people who just weren't anything like what they said they were, and it always causes me a considerable degree of amusement. But people will do that. Yeah, I work with a chap once who was a young lawyer, and he convinced the partners of the firm I work with that he was a star soccer player, right?
Why?
And
why would it boost his cred?
Well, I really don't. I couldn't work this out. And the team he said he played for won the national championship. Right?
Huzzah! And he wasn't in the photo.
Well, no. So he's sending himself, having delivered to the office, big bouquets of flowers and all this kind of stuff, right? And to be fair, he was a short, slight fellow, which doesn't mean you can't play top level soccer, but he didn't look like an athlete.
He wouldn't be in goal. He wouldn't be in goal.
He didn't look like an athlete, I can tell you that. Right. So this goes on and for quite a while, some weeks, right? I'd say about 70% of the employees of the firm just thought, how can you people be believing this, right? But the key people, the partners were, right? And it kept going for quite some time. And it was just a running joke. We were sending each other memos saying, I'm having the day off, to be... we used to get a holiday on the Thursday before grand final day?
No, not in my lifetime.
But show day. It was the show day holiday.
Yeah, show day. Yeah, show day would be was always on a Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a mate of mine sent a memo to our whole department saying that he was having the day off on Thursday because Sheeds had given him a call and they needed him to go to training at Windy Hill. And look, he'll probably play on the weekend, right? This is 1984, 1985, right? And partners were getting outraged about this. How can you be making jokes about this bloke just because he doesn't play AFL? He plays soccer, right? And then eventually it happened, of course, that that everyone discovers that it was all nonsense. But it went on for quite some time, and I can't tell you what the motivation would be to do that. But people will do this stuff, right? That sort of Walter Mitty thing.
Well, I don't know whether it's a case of resume embellishment, but there was a particular woman who was employed. I don't know who directed this, but she was employed as the sports editor. Now, I won't mention her name, and she's long left the Australian, and she ended up at the ABC and caused problems there. So I think last I heard of her, she was watering the plants at the ABC because they didn't want her doing anything more serious than that. But she was named for a couple of years as the sports editor at the Australian. And one of the things about the Australian is that historically, that it wasn't great with the southern states in terms of sport, in terms of AFL, and it needed and has not just recently, but over the years, it's dramatically improved its sports coverage. But this woman, she didn't have a clue about sport, Jack, not a thing. And you'd routinely see captions that were completely wrong. I mean, Royce Hart was playing footy for the Tigers well after he'd retired. There was a Michael Roach, this is how long ago it was, there was a Michael Roach specky for the Tigers, and he was called Royce Hart because no one knew any other Richmond players' names. And there was one great moment when she stood up in the newsroom and she was pretty irascible, she had a temper on her, and she goes, well, someone tell me who the fuck is Ron Barassi? He was a director of the Swans at the time. He coached the Swans a year before. It was like, oh, no, if you don't know this, I'm afraid, well, you've just failed in Australian values. Never mind sports editing. You should be deported on that basis alone.
She wouldn't even know where the Barassi line was, would she?
Oh, God, they ended up making her a managing editor for a while, and it was a complete disaster. People weren't getting paid. People weren't getting paid on time, and it was just awful. And when I made a complaint to one of the bosses, they said, look, mate, when she was in grade 4, she would have been pulling the wings off butterflies. And that was kind of, I guess they wanted someone like that as a managing editor at the time. Managing editor we've got now, that was fantastic. Anyway, top LG, this story comes about when we talk about resume embellishment. A top LGBT activist has quit amid claims he used fake credentials to secure a senior position in a charity that receives millions from the Scottish government. We were told how Timothy Guy Westwood was appointed convener of the LGBT Youth Scotland. Of LGBT Youth Scotland, boasting a suspiciously stellar CV for a 25-year-old and bizarre filtered profile pictures that prompted social media speculation he was on an AI-generated hoax. Did he end up losing the job, Jack?
He did, and now they say he was a bit of a Walter Mitty character. I just find these people very interesting, I've got to say.
They are really interesting. They're quite dangerous too. They can be, but they are very, very. There's people who can really shift and change personalities and things like that. We do see them a little bit, and they can be quite scary. But anyway, it turns out that 70% of workers admitted to having lied on their resumes in a 2023 survey, Jack. That was in the US, but I suspect that's pretty much a universal figure.
Yeah.
Now, we move on to the United States. We better get really moving, Jack. But, of course, the gubernatorial aspirant and current, well, he was in the US Congress, Eric Swalwell, Democrat. It's all come crashing down, Jack, over allegations that he sexually assaulted a woman twice and various other allegations of sexual harassment, Jack. And
I've never seen this happen.
Fight, but he just went.
I've never seen this happen as fast as this.
Yeah, it's quick, wasn't it?
Between the 9th of April and the 13th of April, he's gone from the leading candidate to be the next California government to be out of Congress entirely. Right?
Yeah, and the Democrats will there will be a Democrat elected governor. So who might it now be, Jack? Gavin Newsom is at the end of his term limit. So is there a chance?
Just before we go, he had endorsements from 21 members of Congress. California's big unions, the teachers' union, and within 24 hours of the story breaking, every single endorsement he had walked away from him all at once.
Yeah, so quick. But obviously,
doesn't that make you think? It wasn't
just the nature of the allegations, Jack, but there obviously was a belief. I mean, Swalwell's actions would sort of prove it, but there were actions that I mean, obviously this sort of stuff is untenable in today's politics, in modern politics, those sorts of allegations around you. But there must have at least been a sinking feeling among those people who had endorsed him and supported him that there was truth in these allegations, and they made their minds up so quickly. So there had to be some sort of lingering doubt about him.
Well, all the reporting now, the reporters are now saying everyone's known about this for 13 years, right? That this is how he behaves. Right? There was a reporter from, is it called Dublin County, where his seat is, his congressional seat is, who said, we all knew this right back then. Everybody knew, but they've suddenly turned on him. What this makes me think is that it's someone like Nancy Pelosi doing something that Tip O'Neill would approve of, that they have just decided he's an impediment and he's going to go.
He's under the bus. Push him under the bus.
Yeah.
And does it leave the door open for for Kamala Harris, Jack, to run as a gubernatorial candidate?
Well, they had the problem is they had too many Democrat candidates and have a jungle primary in California. So jungle only the
primary, for the benefit of our listeners, is where you've got multiple candidates, right?
Yeah, and
not
it's
just two, but half a dozen.
Yeah, and they're both parties in the same primary, but only the two top candidates go through. And at the moment, or even it's just up until a few weeks ago, it looked like the two top candidates were both going to be Republicans because there were so many Democrats that they were splitting the vote. And obviously the Democrats don't want this to happen because if you win the Democrat nomination, you become governor, right?
Yeah.
Getting rid of Swalwell, who was the leading Democrat, has opened up the opportunities. And who else is there? Kamala Harris is still making noises that maybe she might do it. But the most likely for me is the billionaire, Tom Steyer.
Right. Tell me a little bit about him besides him being a billionaire. Well, how did he become a billionaire, Jack?
He's a tech fella, right?
All right. I'm not sure there's people we want in public office, to be honest, but anyway.
Yeah. And I think he's already spent $16 million on the campaign without getting beyond about 14% of the vote, right? So he needs a bit of assistance, and getting rid of Eric Swalwell, I suspect, might be the assistance he was looking for.
Prediction markets giving him a roughly 55 to 60% chance of becoming the next governor of California. Ninth biggest economy in the world, Jack. Just a monolith, economic, social, cultural. So much comes from California.
Yeah. Sorry, $120 million he spent on his campaign so far.
It's nickel and dime for him by the sounds of things. Billionaire climate activist and Democrat. Oh, of course I do know Tom Steyer. I'm sorry. Yes, yes. He'd be a perfect candidate in California, wouldn't he?
Is he enough of an airhead, or can he fake it for a bit?
Yeah, it gets a bit real for a while. Steyer is at 60% to win, around that 54 to 60%. We haven't got a Kamala in there yet, but the rest of them are just making up the numbers, including the Republican, who's got about a 7 or 8% chance of winning. Have they had have the Democrats been through a primary process yet for California?
Well, they're all in the same jungle primary. So there's the two Republicans, one of whom will be the Republican nominee because he's got Trump endorsement now. So they will firm up around one of.
Good thing or bad thing these days, Jack?
In California, it's still a good thing, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Not so sure that'll be the case. So, look, there is, as you say, a jungle primary, an absolute long list of potential candidates. So when we talk about Swalwell, Jack, leaving his he resigned from Congress, and he's basically just disappeared. What happens to these guys when they admit by omission that they have been naughty boys and girls?
It kind of depends who they are. Some of them get a
Trump gets them. I mean, Trump's got a civil standard judgment against him for rape. He's got convictions for essentially fraudulent business dealings, etc. And he just seems to brush all that off.
Yeah, well, some people get a pass card, and Bill Clinton's kind of the same.
Bill
Clinton and Donald Trump get a pass card because we've known about them for such a long period of time that there's almost nothing you could read about them that's going to be a surprise. Right?
I'd agree with that of Trump. If you try and humiliate him out of office or sort of cancel him, I just, it's just not effective. As I've been saying about the Democrats for a while, economy, throw in the cost of living and get your message across that way and keep your rhetoric around Trump down to a sort of dull roar. I think that's probably the best way to go. You're going to essentially all elections, regardless of where they are won on the economy, and that's where Trump is definitely weakest at the moment. It perhaps wasn't the economy, Jack, but a overwhelming uprising of voters in Hungary that saw Viktor Orban pack his bags and leave, and he's replaced by Peter Magyar, a 45-year-old younger figure, leader of the centre-right Tisza party, and he was in fact a member of Viktor Orban's party up until not so long ago. He's been hailed throughout Europe as a great result, but they won. I'm not sure whether votes are still being counted, but they won close enough to create a 65% of the voters, I understand.
Yes, they did.
And that will allow them through parliamentary representation to be able to change things in the Constitution, Jack. In fact, it looks like he's just sacked his president, or he's about to.
Yes. Yeah, well, his first public speech post the election, he says, I don't believe the president's legitimate, and nor does anybody else.
Yeah, and today I think he's moved on him. And yes, it's a very strange thing. What does it mean to the Russians? Russians go home was one of the many banners raised around the place. Awful lot of Russian money pumped into Orban and his party. What does it mean to the Russians? What does it mean to the Ukrainians? And does it create more stability within the EU?
The EU certainly thinks so. I think they're going to be disappointed. He's already made a statement. One of the things that the Hungarians had done was to refuse to join the EU Migration Pact. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And his statement this morning is, we will still not join the pact. We will actually reinforce the border further to protect Hungary and broader Europe. So they're going to be disappointed if they thought that he was going to he's going to change the Hungarian position on that. What it might do, though, is change. I think it will change Hungary's relationship with the Russians.
With Russia quite significantly, I would imagine. One of the first people to congratulate Madjo was, of course, President Zelensky of Ukraine, Jack. He needs all the good news he can get. Well, we might just move on to sport, if that's
good idea.
Okay, Jack. I did want to touch on this little topic that you've raised here called fuel, which is human fuel abbreviated, a little portmanteau there. What do we think of replacing food with water mixed with supplements, Jack? Yeah,
it doesn't appeal to me, I can say, but then I'm probably not the target market,
Well, these weight loss drugs that are essentially around diabetes, type 2 diabetes, prevention or management. Some of these, of course, have been taken for sort of weight loss drugs. What it does, Jack, and told sort of psychologically or perhaps neurologically, it creates a distaste for food. The foods that you used to enjoy, you don't have that enjoyment. That's why, I'm carrying a few hamburgers off over my playing weight. I will refuse to take those drugs because I actually like food. There are certain types of food that I will continue to enjoy, and I don't want to sort of. And I've never used Ozempic or anything, things like that. But I don't want to think, I've just got to eat for the sake of it, and I don't want to taste lovely flavours and things like that. So, yeah. The other side of this coin, Jack, is that we have this just in my local shopping centre in the Southern Highlands. They're about to open a new supplement store. And there is, and I get back to this argument about, we haven't really worked our way through psychologically through the pandemic, that people are turning more and more to supplements rather than visiting doctors. Now, some doctors, I freely admit, you wouldn't waste your time with, but to move from, let's say, I'm not sure. You wouldn't take a statin, for example. Do you take a statin for your heart condition?
No.
So when I looked at the top 10 drugs by prescription issued in Australia, the top 2 are statins. Now, they're slightly controversial. Well, perhaps more than slightly controversial. They do have a fairly wide-ranging side effect of muscular pain from moderate to severe, and they're sometimes handed out to people with quite low risk of cardiovascular disease. But they make up the 2 top-selling drugs by prescription in the country. The others are in groups of 2 too. There are 2 drugs that are widely prescribed for gastric reflux. There are 2 drugs that are widely prescribed for blood pressure control. There are 2 that are antibiotics, and there are 2 that are psychotropics. That essentially makes up that top 10. And you think, well, I'm certainly not in a position to say, hey, stop taking those drugs, guys, because that's something that it should be a discussion but between individuals and their doctors. But a lot of people are ignoring, these sorts of things and going to supplements, even in relatively intelligent people, family members, Jack. One of them who had a major heart attack and subsequent heart surgery, is now sort of pushing supplements as the pathway to health. And you think, mate, if you didn't have a cardiologist, you'd be dead now. You could have taken all. You could have taken all the supplements you like. You got essence of blackberry. You could drink your own piss, but you would be dead now. And I really find it hard to understand how people can take that leap. Like I say, emotionally, I just don't understand how they can come. What I'd be doing, and you probably have done with your heart issues over the years, is thank God for cardiologists or the one who treats you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, rather than saying, I don't want to take those drugs. I'm going to do this. Yeah, okay, well, next time we'll get Dr. Oz Mehmet to treat you and see how you get on. We'll get Bobby Kennedy around to write you a script.
Yeah, I don't always do what my cardiologist wants me to do straight away. Sometimes I sit on things for a bit because I'm not all that fond of taking.
I do a bit of that too, to be honest. Yeah.
I did have an occasion with him a little while ago where he'd been at me to start taking something for some months, and I kind of gave in the morning I was due to have an appointment with him, and I walked in and he said, so have you started taking that medication? I said, yes. I said, do I look a bit better? And he's looked at me and he said, so when did you actually start taking it? And I said, about 8:30. Yeah. But yes, no, I'm not a man. What I thought was amazing about this fuel thing, the human fuel thing, is it's basically a powder you mix with water, right? And it's a meal replacement.
Yeah, right? There's all these protein whey and things like that on the market now.
None of that. I thought there's always odd people who want to buy this sort of stuff, right? And then I looked at that, and the company who designed this, invented it, and who was selling it was bought out by a much larger company, and they sold it for 780 odd million pound. Right? And I'm just thinking, that would be handy,
Well, yeah, but I mean. The first thing you say about supplements, they're essentially they're unregulated. So, and in this country, the regulators say, well, you can't say it'll fix cancer, and you can't say in the event of heart attack, please drink our thick shake. You can't say these things because they're medically dubious. But the rest, it's kind of all open up to what can be said about these supplements, and they are not subject to the same regulations as pharmaceuticals are. The other thing is that we do have this sort of fad, and it comes from relatively intelligent people. It's a little bit like the anti-vaxxer argument, Jack, that when we saw this sort of anti-vax movement, it wasn't coming from working class people. It wasn't coming from poverty. It was coming from the middle classes who decided they knew better than immunologists, virologists, etc. And I still find that really hard to understand.
Well, if you map the anti-vaxxer movement in California, you can map it against the existence of Whole Foods stores.
Yeah, it's what it is.
And it matches up.
It actually gets a little bit worse than that, Jack, because if you are, let's say, in the business of political influence and you come from the extremes, let's say the right-wing extreme, if you've got a pool of people that have rejected scientific evidence and medical advice, that those people are the people you can focus on to deliver propaganda and influence how they think and act. So it's not just this Whole Foods has grown up through that. We did a podcast on the conditional release program where we interviewed a woman who was a yoga teacher who living in Sydney, moved down to the south coast of New South Wales, and well, long story short, the topic of that program is tell me my yoga instructor, not her, but what she was finding with others. Why does my yoga instructor want to talk about the Jews? So you've got this gullible group of people who are also easily persuadable, and they can be directed politically as well. All right, we must get on to sport. We're running very, very late, Jack. The Zach Butters tribunal hearing case, complete and utter farce. I'm not sure where Port Adelaide are with this now, whether they were going to appeal. It was a $1,500 fine to Zach Butters, one of their better players, one of their midfielders, who's basically on the move next year, isn't he?
Did you see the reporting on the tribunal hearing and the farce it became at the end? Jason Johnson, the former Essendon player, I think, he was one on the tribunal, and he had to go somewhere. So at the end of the hearing, while the submissions were being made, he's listening in on the phone from his car.
This is not how it's supposed to work, Jack. First thing I'd say about Zach Butters, he is the most fined player in VFL AFL history, surpassing Toby Green a couple of years ago, but he's well out in front there too. There's not so much a history of abuse, it's striking, tripping, the various things that you can attract the fight. Striking tends to be a jumper punch or a belly punch, that sort of stuff.
Let's face it, if you got in front of Toby Green, you're going okay in that, aren't you?
I think Toby, I saw the documentary that Prime made around the Giants and a number of other football clubs, and Toby and his wife going, look, you've just been reported again. You know, what are you doing with your life? All that sort of stuff. So I think he's trying to be a good boy, but it's not really in his nature.
Can I just add, you'd have him in your side tomorrow.
He's probably the best all-round footballer, certainly the best small forward, if you want to call him that, in the caper, I think. Zach Butters not far away from the top of the tree either. But he said, you can't pay that to the umpire foot. And apparently that was overheard by his teammate. The umpire awarded a 50-metre penalty to the St Kilda player who'd been given a free kick, who kicked the goal, which pretty much sorted out that game, didn't it? It was pretty much determined the result of that game with a few minutes to go. Butters approached
and the umpire works for a betting company. Can we just add?
Well,
this
he doesn't. That had to be clarified. But I'd have to say he doesn't. But he has, in fact, I guess you would call it sort of consultancy work for some agency in regards to horse racing, not sports betting. But you'd have to say, I can't see umpires in a highly professional sport with that kind of background should be getting a gig.
No.
It just shouldn't happen.
It's a Caesar's
the worst
wife
thing that can happen to your sport is if it is undermined by match fixing. It's the worst thing. It'll kill crowds. It'll kill the love of the game, all that sort of stuff. So just to sort of see off that kind of potential, you can't have umpires. I don't think. I don't think this bloke will be umpiring by round 10.
The AFL administration, the current iteration of the AFL administration, even when they always seem to make it look like a fix is in, even when it's not. This is incompetence. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, what decision could have been made? Because it essentially came down to his word against mine, with a little bit of input from Ollie Wines, Zach Butters' Port Adelaide teammate. I guess what could have been, and of course this was complicated by the fact that the umpire's mic wasn't functioning. There was no audio recorded. So I think in that case you just declare force majeure and everyone moves on.
Yeah.
That's what probably should have happened. But instead he copped a $1,500 fine. And while that's a minuscule, he's paid, I think, $52,000 over the journey. So it won't bother him too much. But, it just seemed to be a bit of rough justice, I think, when they couldn't prove what he had said. The AFL statement was that they believed the umpire could not have made that up. So anyway, we'll move on. But another little problem for the AFL is where the Giants play in Western Sydney, Greater Western Sydney Giants, only 97 boys, that's roughly 5 teams, aged 13 and under, were registered for junior AFL in the area. And I presume that is Western Sydney. And that's a pretty awful result. Union's reasonably strong, but of course, league's very, very strong in the West.
Yeah, so all the money that the AFL itself has tipped a lot of money into Greater Western Sydney and into the sport in the western suburbs to not much effect, is what we're saying.
Yeah, because it determined that there were 2 major growth corridors in Australia. One was on the Gold Coast, the other one was in Western Sydney.
Yes,
and look, they'll keep throwing money at it. Excuse me, until it works. And it may take 50 years for it to work.
Yeah, but it's time for a rethink of how they're spending the money. I think Gerard Healy made this point. I think it's a good one. They've got to rethink exactly how they're going about it.
Yes, indeed. Gout Gout. By gee, isn't he wonderful? He's just magnificent. Of course, he broke the national record and a under-20 world record for the 200 metres. Not really his go, the 200 metres, but he managed to run it in 19.67 seconds.
I think like the big West Indian fella here, this will be his specialty, the 200 in the end. Like Bolt.
We've got half of a Olympic medaling 100 metre, 100 4x100 metre relay. I mean,
yeah.
We got some fantastic runners at the moment. And he is an absolute gift. It was just uplifting to watch him power down the straight in the 200 there and blow records away. What a wonderful sportsman he is. Also seems to be really level-headed as well. So I don't think he's going to, go wandering off to other pursuits or anything like that. But he's going to be a superstar of Australian sport.
Yeah, I've seen the interviews with him, and he explains his training program really clearly and well, and he looks right on top of things to me.
Yeah, it's all before him, and Godspeed. But NRL, Jack. If you're in the tipping competition in the NRL and you got the 9 games right, by gee, you'd be if you had a punt on that, you would have done very well. Bulldogs, they were 16 all against Penrith at half time. I watched that game and it looked like Penrith were just going to run over the top of them. Bulldogs scored the first 16 points and Penrith the next 16. He just said, oh, well, it's going to happen. And the Bulldogs just smacked them. So that was pretty extraordinary. And the other thing is that the Storm, I think, are 13th or 14th on the ladder. And I don't think they've been there for 30 years with the possible exclusion. Well, no, they were 18th when they lost points over the salary cap scandal. But they've got a job ahead of them at the moment, the Melbourne Storm.
Yeah. Eventually, every club gets there at some stage.
And it was always remarkable that they just kept going, even though they lost great players and retirement and transfers and what have you. But, yeah, it looks like their number has come up in the EPL, Jack. If you're an Arsenal fan, you're in a state of perpetual anxiety at the moment. Arsenal's lead is now back to 6 points with Manchester City breathing down their necks.
And a game in hand.
and a game in hand, but they play each other this weekend, Jack.
They do.
And that will probably determine it. I mean, if Man City win, there'll be some tremors among the Arsenal fans. Also, too, soccer-wise, the Matildas had a 2-0 win over Kenya, and I believe that was Kerr's 50th goal for the country, which is quite an extraordinary achievement. All right. Look, just before we go, I just wanted to make one little correction from last week. Jack maintained, and he was correct, that Jonathan Swan was at the New York Times, and I believe he was still at Axios. Keeping up with that thing. Not that it matters a whole lot, but except to say Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman are about to release a book on how the Iran war started. And we were chatting about Jonathan Swan, Jack, off air, and he is an Australian journalist, of course, used to work at the Sydney Morning Herald, and he seems to have extraordinary access. Haberman's had it for a while, but he seems to have extraordinary access to the Trump administration that so few other journalists have.
Yeah, my guess is that he's pretty much a straight reporter. He's a much better reporter than his dad. Can I add that? He's the son of the Norman Swan, the ABC medico.
Well, he wasn't a journalist, Jack.
He wasn't a doctor either, was he?
I mean, I would argue that he's done more for this sort of shift away from medical science than just about anyone, but certainly in Australia. But yeah, look, I had a little bit to do with Jonathan, and he's terrific. Anyway, yes, the point is that he's at the New York Times. Reporter. And a very good reporter, great access to the Trump administration, and he and Haberman, who's a rather famous journalist in her own right, political reporter, have a book out essentially looking at the origins of the Iran war from the Trump administration's point of view.
And what I've read of it's pretty good. Can I just say that the best thing I read all week, a little bit of good advice on X, formerly Twitter.
Yes.
Don't be afraid of a 6-month home renovation. Those 12 months will be the most fulfilling 2 years of your life.
Yeah, well, they're very, very clever. Except to say, the people who've been been having their apartment renovated 3 or 4 stories above you, Jack, that seems to have been knocked over in about 4 weeks. Haven't heard a sound from them since.
Partly all these renovations here are internal renovations, and there's no peskiness with the local authorities about getting approval. And even when there are peskiness about that, it's very common. People
just do it anyway.
People in Hong Kong much prefer to ask for forgiveness than for permission.
Well, it's getting that way in Australia, Jack, just very briefly. In my own shire, went to Caribbee. It's about 12 months for a DA approval. I mean, that's a disgrace.
Yeah,
and people are just going, oh, well, the hell with it. I'll build the couple. What's the worst thing that can happen? They just make me tell me to take it down.
Yeah, exactly right. This is where you end up.
Now, just the other point to make about that, Jake, is a 6-month home renovation. The claim is that it might take 12 months. I reckon that's if you're getting a house knocked up in 12 months in Australia, you're doing very, very well.
And that will get worse.
Yeah, and it will. There's no doubt about that. All right, we want to thank Jack for his opinions today, and I just want to also just remind people, drop us a note when you've got some comments about the show or something you want to talk about. We might just have an overall. In fact, off the cuff here, I think we will have a discussion about Australian values, community and tribalism. It might come down to minutiae like how we became the supporters of our respective football teams, those sorts of things. What are the major cultural influences in our lives? Bear in mind that we are both white old blokes, and if you're looking for a lot of diversity, you probably won't find it. But we will sort of get into that vexed business of what Australian values are. So drop us a line if you've got some comments on that. So we better take it out. We are running very late today. So we'll go now and look forward to chatting with you next week. See you, folks.